Breakout Shot, Chapter 3, Mr. Tong. In a depth of smoky shadow sat Tong, facing the front of the pool hall. He could not stand his back to the door, and so there he sat with his back to the wall, with the posture of a man living in the shadow of his fear of assassination. There was a point in his career when he had cut out all that could distract him from the moment, focusing to the point of obsession on only his survival. He would sit and eat in his dining room in silence, so as to be sure to hear something that might alert him. Voices, the sound of a car door closing, footsteps. He took his showers with a gun resting on the ledge next to the soap. Anyone could be the Grim Reaper, and it could happen at any time. He was focused on what was before him, a practitioner of the moment and of paranoia. He learned to hesitate, see how things develop, wait and hold position, and then like a diver into shark-infested waters he would go, always on high alert. It would determine everything about him, how he positioned himself, like an actor on a stage, always aware of where the front door was, the back exits, the possible audience of assassins waiting in the wings. Now he was an old man. He thought all serious enemies were sure to be dead by now, yet some of these habits still defined him. There were nights he had awakened in a cold sweat from behind the veil, a gruesome face of some forgotten ghost back to haunt him. He would sit through till dawn, flipping channels in silence, the television muted, pausing for only a few moments on a channel. He would unmute the television if it was a film he enjoyed that he had seen before. He would say some of the lines and change the channel again. Often his mind was blank, but then sometimes he remembered some awful darkness, exhausted, finished with the night, a cigarette smoked in silence with all the stars above them before they departed the sight. He remembered the looks on some of their faces. He had tricked them. Their lives were over unless they found some way out, but then each moment led to the next without any way out. And now there was nothing left to do but beg. Some of them told him about their life, intimate details. There must be something they can do. Please, anything. There was not. He shuffled a deck of cards and dealt out gin between himself and the young Chinese kid that sat across the table from him. The kid furrowed his brow and shifted his cards around with one hand while holding the cards in the other, giving away the high card patterns he was developing. The kid wore a gray suit. It sat well on him and looked expensive, and the kid tried his best and sometimes beat Tong. Tong liked the kid. He brought him envelopes and rarely came to him needing to kill someone. His dealings rarely came to that. After decades of blood spraying and begging for clemency before card trunks, and the crunch of bone and men pissing themselves screaming, begging for their lives on the way to hidden graves out in the boonies, after years and years of watching degenerate gamblers and half-wit crooks dragged away, their eyes wild and ramblings desperate, certain of their fate, to suffer tremendously then die, their blood-curdling screams muffled through the back-country wilderness, no one around to hear their desperate and hopeless begging. And the years before that, a wrench in his hand, ripping the teeth from a face screaming in pain and terror, putting the barrel of a gun up a vagina, where is your husband? We just want to talk to him. And gouging out an eye to serve as a reminder. God, please, no, they screamed as he dug the eye out with his pocket knife. After all the suffering horrors, He was, however, not glad to have time to reflect. Tong needed a distraction. The mundane meditation of birds chirping in the garden, the sound of a fountain streaming endlessly from the penis of a child angel, alcohol and drugs. None of it was enough to drown out the suffering pattern haunting his quiet moments. Then Tong had rediscovered his love for pool. He had played when he was young, a practitioner of the pool hall hustle. Deep within, he wanted full control over the physical world of balls and cues unfelt. He wanted to be god of it. Tong wanted to beat the best, and Billy was the best. Billy had been taking a victory lap for a long while now, and when Billy would play, Tong would play. It was well known that Tong had become obsessed with trying to beat Billy. Tong was ex-military, but nobody knew it, and he was also a half-retired gangster, and everybody knew that. He had done unspeakable things as a soldier, and had done worse as a gangster, though he felt the latter deserved it more. Sometimes he would meet with the boss, and the boss would hem or haw, or say nothing at all, and Tong would sit and wait and be patient, but he cared not for any of these things anymore. Tong wanted to play pool, and he wanted to beat everyone. One night, Billy took Tong with him to play poker at the green room. Tong ran hot and spent the night euphoric, stacks and stacks of chips towering on the felt before him. Tong was hooked. The next night, Tong offered to buy the green room game from George. George said no, and Tong continued to show up and play and run hot. He would constantly talk about buying the game. Tong wanted to play poker, and he wanted to be running the game. He wanted to be the one in control. That was the way it always was and had always been for Tong. George told him no, and that he didn't give a damn about his money. Tong kept asking, as if he were not really asking, but telling George it would come to pass. George thought of how Tong told him the game would be his with certainty, and it made his blood boil hot in his veins. Only over his dead body would it happen, and he made this clear to Tong. "You'll have to kill me to get this game, you smug chink," George said. Tong thought about saying, "Maybe I will take you up on that offer, grab you by your fruity ponytail and slit your fucking throat," but instead he said nothing. He wasn't sure why, but it was unnerving to not understand what George was thinking. Tong could recognize that George was a maniac like himself. Rumors stirred that Tong would retaliate for being disrespected, but he was focused on his singular purpose now, beating Billy, even if it meant hiring someone else to do it. The card game could wait. Enter Odin. He had heard about Odin and how he never really missed. A master of the angles, his hair slicked back, and he wore a strange, bulky leather jacket with box-like shoulders and sleeves too short. He had Odin brought before him like a king holding court.
You play for me, I put up the money, you keep the winnings.
What if I lose? You lose? No. Well then. Tong watched Odin play, and it was as if the game were easy, some kind of joke. He held his shoulders high and his posture rigid in his stiff leather jacket, and sunk ball after ball, rack after rack. Okay, that's enough. We get the gist, said Tong, mid-rack. Tong tossed a fold of $100 bills onto the center of the green felt table. Come back again tomorrow, he told Odin.
The next night, Tong stepped out into the alley, and his shadow stretched out under the orange glow of the streetlight next to Billy. So you'll play my guy tonight. Tong had a cigarette dangling from his mouth as he passed through the billiards hall. Now he lit it. Billy stood with his feet planted in the middle of the alley and his arms crossed. He looked up and down the alley, then at the sky, then he looked at Tong. "Yeah, Mr. Tong, I'll play your guy." "Are you ready to get destroyed, Mr. Billy?" "Yeah, I sure am. I've beaten every hot shot from Vegas to Harvard, and I'm ready to do it again. And if not, so be it. Nobody can be the greatest forever." "Yeah, but you must play with my guy no matter what. We play marathon session. I have assurances from you that you will continue to play." Billy was quiet. "I have always kept my word, but I brought that hot shot from Denver to play you, and he kept losing and tilted early. You beat him, what, 30 times in a row?" "Something like that." Tong nodded. "I never stopped playing him. I followed our agreement until the sun came up, we said. I took him out into this alley and told him he had to win. He was shaking and crying. He was a broken man, Mr. Billy. Everything on the line, and he faltered. I told him he had to calm down. I told him he had to win or I would take one of his eyes and fuck his wife. I tell him, at dawn, if you do not win one game, I punch you in the eye until your eye turns to mush and then you go blind." And what did he do? Tong waited for Billy to respond. "He lost every game." "Yeah, so I did what I said. In fact, I got carried away and I beat him to death. Another one of these losers who says he can win and can't keep it together. Falls apart, begs, cries. I did fuck his wife, by the way. I did give her his severance pay, though." "Great pep talk, Mr. Tongs." Tong took a drag from his smoke and looked worried. "I hope he's as good as they say he is. I tell you, Mr. Billy." Billy laughed. "I thought you were certain." Tong looked Billy hard in the eye. "Nothing is certain, Billy. That's for sure." With his own words in his head, Billy felt a rare moment of uncertainty as he followed Tong back through the doors and into the pool hall, and all eyes were on them. The boss and the local hotshot, their rivalry, the years of Tong losing money trying to beat Billy, making Billy a local celebrity. Billy had beat the best that Tong had brought to face him. Now he had found this thin Mexican in a strange leather jacket. Odin had just come into the pool hall and lifted his chin, maintained eye contact with Billy for a moment and smiled. Now he looked down at the floor holding his cue, tapping his foot and bopping his head to a song playing in his head. The pool hall was quiet besides the whispers and chatter, the smoke hanging in the air. Through the front windows, cars were parked up and down the street, and the headlights went by, and people passed, all under the glow of the streetlight. Odin walked up to the table and set down his cue and silently racked the balls up into the shape of a diamond. He had slick hair and a leather jacket that was sized too small, seeming to constrain him, though he immediately ran the table twice in a row with a beautiful control and finesse, as if he were ballet dancing the balls across the table, his tight jacket seeming to work for him, his arms kept rigid, his shoulders squared. His movement was sure-footed and deliberate. He ran the table again and looked up with a grin after sinking the 9-ball. Only Tong smiled back. When Odin finally relented, it was not due to a missed shot, but rather that he had no reasonable shot at all. Billy would be the one to miss, after first making a series of much more difficult shots. "Nerves," said Tong. "You'll be fine, Billy. It's just nerves." Tong lifted his chin back and cackled toward the heavens, and the room erupted along with him, everyone laughing, and for a moment Billy wanted to storm out, toss his cue and give up, which of course he could not do. so he held still and focused on holding his expression, his face a mask of distant disinterest, his arms hanging at his side, cue loose in his hands, ready. The night waned on into the early morning, with Billy down deep in a hole of loss, untold stacks, bands of cash, more than he had ever dreamed he could lose, so defeated that his desire for it to be over eclipsed his pride entirely. By late morning the next day he said, "Well, Odin, I think you've beaten me. Not my night. Good game." He put out his hand, and Odin shook it with serious eyes. "You shoot beautifully," said Odin. "Thank you for the action, my friend." He looked at Billy as he set his cue into the case on the bar table. "Why do you bother with Mr. Tongs anyway?" he said. "Other parts of the city, there are better games, bigger fish. He is a dangerous man. I don't see why you—" Odin paused, searching for the words. "Web yourself in his entanglement. You could easily become a meal for the spider. I just like to play here. This place is the real place." Odin laughed and looked around the room. "Yeah, man, this is a real place to get stuffed into a trunk in the alley and taken off to the boonies to get a bullet in the back of the head. That's what they do. You must know that by now." "Well, what the fuck are you doing here, then?" "He paid me a lot of money," Odin said, leaning in closer. "He has some kind of fucking problem with you, man. Really went out of his way and is probably really losing money somehow in the situation. Almost taking the worst of it as the winner. He's that nuts. I would avoid this man. Go play somewhere else. Rebuild. Why not play in a looser part of town where the easy money is flowing a little more?" Billy turned towards the door and went. He turned back and looked at Odin. "Thanks for the advice, kid. I'll see you tomorrow." Tong sat in the dim light of the pool hall as the action died down, and in the late night he was alone, smoking and drinking in the back. He felt an emptiness where his desire used to sit. He had won, but now there was nothing there. All there would ever be would be the next game, and after that, his death.